I'm out of here.
Yes, we are official. So first things first, welcome. Thank you all for being here, for joining us today. We always start with just a little bit of homework in terms of what our session is going to look like today, kind of how things run. We will start out with an introduction of our sponsor for this session, and that will be followed by our contributor spotlight, which is one of our educational contributors for the Startup Brewery website, sharing expertise in their area of the industry with the rest of us. Then we'll follow that. Well, and actually Matt said any questions during his presentation are welcome today too. So no need to wait till after his presentation. Then we'll take questions about his presentation and follow down whatever rabbit hole that gets us. And we'll also be open for any kind of questions that come from the attendees. So feel free to raise your hand, which you can do by clicking on reactions at the bottom of your screen. And I will watch for that. And you can also put questions in the chat. Candace is going to keep an eye on the chat for me. And we can just kind of go wherever this hour takes us. Our mission is to create a beer industry community, a craft beverage industry community, to raise the education and awareness of all things craft beer for startups and for expanding breweries. So whether you're a dreamer, a startup, or if you're already open, we're bringing together people in the industry that have been around for a long time and are willing to help and advise and guide people. That helps all of us because everybody is more knowledgeable, but at the same time, it also lowers the barrier to access for a lot of dreamers who might not have other ways to get some of this access and be connected with people who understand what they're doing and how to help guide them in the right direction. Before we get started, I wanted to put on your calendar June 15th. Our contributor spotlight is going to be on Dustin Hauk. He's going to talk about, well, he specializes in location and brewery design. And I suspect that this first session that he's going to guide will be more about location. But again, it's kind of wherever the conversation takes us. So Dustin is on deck for June. So Matt, let's get started. Our sponsor this time is NFP Insurance. And since Matt is also part of NFP, I'll let him speak to what if NFP is before he rolls right into his presentation. Do you want me to go ahead and share my screen?
Please.
Okay. Okay, should be able to do that.
Am I waiting for you to share something? Sorry, Laura.
Oh, you want me to share?
Oh, no. We're good. I don't have anything to share as far as screen goes right here. This is just y'all looking at my beautiful talking head. Sorry.
Okay.
So NFP. So NFP is one of the world's largest insurance brokerages. I'm part of the property casualty division. Property casualty insurance, obviously being insurance to cover any liabilities you have if you harm someone physically or their property, or if you harm them financially. That's the type of insurance that I work in. Obviously, we have a fully fledged employee benefits department. We have retirement services. We have the personal lines and bonding departments as well. So if it's a financial instrument and you need it, there's somebody at NFP that is an expert in that field. Most notably, like within NFP, we have several different industry verticals that are related to construction, real estate, manufacturing, life sciences. Life sciences, interestingly enough, is mostly cannabis these days, which I find interesting. So, but we have experts in each of those divisions that we can call upon if we happen to start working with a client that is doing something that's a little bit outside of our bailiwick, and that's been a huge benefit for me, and then particularly those life sciences clients that I mentioned, because that's a new and emerging field. So yeah, if anyone has any questions about, not necessarily about NFP, but if there's something that you've been if you've had a conversation with someone where they're wondering about business continuity or retirement or anything like that, it may not be something that I deal with, but I'm happy to make an introduction to somebody that I trust and I've worked with. So that's us, NFP.
Okay. So are you sharing?
So, well, so I guess to kind of explain how I'm going to go about today. So my background, there's a couple of you that know this already, but my background is not necessarily insurance. It is insurance, but as it relates to the brewing world, Laura's always pushing me to share this story of my kind of how I got to this place where I'm this beer and this insurance guy. So in order to do that, I have to do something that's really painful for me. And that's to kind of talk about myself for a little bit. So I'm going to do that. And that's going to, I'll try to make this as quick as possible. But that'll give you an idea of why I am considered by some people to be an expert in this field. So I've been in Colorado now since about 2006. Moved here from Texas. The reason you know I was from Texas is because there were a bunch of Miller Lite cans in my recycling bin at the end of every week. But very quickly was introduced to the world of craft beer. The very first craft beer that I recall having was at GABF in 2007. We walked up the day of GABF and bought tickets, and I had a sample of Billy's Chili's from, I think it's from Twisted Pine Brewery. And it blew my mind that a beer could taste like that. And so that just kind of set it off for me. So from there, I think the very next one I had was Hibernation Ale from Great Divide, which also blew my mind. Anyway, that's beside the point. I was at the time I was working with a large multinational brokerage called Hub International, and one of the clients that I had was Wynkoop Brewing Company, and I fell in love with those people. I fell in love with the industry through them, and just the passion that these folks had for what they do. After a couple of years, I decided I wanted to leave Hub, but because of the experience I had working with Wynkoop, I knew that I wanted to work with craft brewers and wherever it was that I went to next. So I called Wynkoop. I knew that they just lost a brewer, and I wanted to come work on their canning line for a couple months while I looked for my next job. So went in, interviewed. Andy, the head brewer, thought that I was just trying to figure out a way to learn how to open up my own brewery, which wasn't the case at the time. But they hired me, and what was supposed to be a couple of months turned into about a 2-year-long love affair. At Wynkoop, the thing about Wynkoop is we were pumping out between, at the time, somewhere around 4,000 barrels of beer a year, which is a pretty good, decent amount of beer. There are only 4 of us that did every single job there, whether that was brewing the beer, canning the beer, filtering the beer, packaging the beer. So in those 2 years, I learned a ton about what it takes to run a brewery. Eventually, we got pregnant with our second child, and we all know what the wages are for brewers these days. So I needed to go back to the risk management world, which I did. Cincinnati Insurance Company out of Cincinnati, surprisingly enough, knew that I was an insurance guy and knew that I had experience with craft brewers. So they came to me and asked me to help them build their craft beverage program, which is their insurance program that's very specific to distilleries, cideries, wineries, breweries, and now also kombucha manufacturers. That's just different enough where they need their own policies. After helping them build that program, we ended up placing that coverage, that specific policy, for over 50 breweries there here in Colorado. And after a couple years, I started to get a little bit homesick for the brewing world. So I started my own brewery called Gold Spot Brewing Company. I did everything there from all you wonderful people here on this webcast know that we encourage folks not to bite off too much. I was the guy that did way too much. I was swinging hammers. I basically did everything at the brewery besides lay the plumbing and the electrical. Once I got the thing built out, I was doing everything else as well. I was hiring, I was firing, I was training, I was brewing the beer, I was serving the beer, all while still being an insurance guy and while still trying to raise a couple kids. And so surprisingly enough, burnout set in after close to 5 years, and we sold the brewery just before the pandemic hit. Thankfully to my head brewer, Calissa, who I trained and sold the place to, and she busted her butt, and Gold Spot is still going strong today. So that's my slightly long-winded version. Thanks for sticking with me through that. I'm explaining kind of where I came from and where I sit now. So with that, I will share my screen with you. So now we're going to actually talk about insurance.
The penalty.
What's that?
The penalty for surviving your
The
story.
penalty for surviving, absolutely. Yeah. Let's see here.
I truly think this is one of the areas that people know the least about. Looks good.
Which are you guys seeing let's see.
Pre-planning, going to market. Oh, we've got the whole PowerPoint.
Yeah, you got the whole PowerPoint there. I'm just trying to, well, there we go. All right, well, we'll just stick with this one. So,
actually, Matt, just go to the very top and hit.
yeah, I'm hitting that, but I've got it open on my other screen over here. So it's not switching over. Sorry, guys. I'm a little bit. Bear with me, guys. Sorry. I want to try to get this right. Laura, do you have it pulled up?
I can.
Yeah, please do that. Sorry,
I think you made a change to it though.
no, not enough to matter. I just moved 2 things around.
Okay, I'll pull it up. Let's see. Slideshow. From the beginning. Okay. Share. Let's see if I can make mine work the same way.
Here you go, Laura. I got it.
Okay, good. I think I crashed just trying to do it myself. So you may have to just talk from your slides if we can't get there.
So,
Okay.
you guys seen it?
Yep. We're also seeing the next slide, but this works.
Okay, very good. So anyway, Star Brewery. thanks everybody. So this is the one about insurance. If anybody gets the pop culture reference there, I'll buy you a beer next time. What is it, Candace?
Candace gets a beer.
Friends.
Yep. There you go. So pre-planning. Pre-planning for the brewery. So you're just getting started out. You've got finance for the brewery, however you did that, and at some point you realize, holy cow, I need insurance. So that's a great first step is to realize that. But when do you need it? So the second that you sign a lease, a commercial lease with your landlord, or the second that you purchase the property, you have an insurable interest at that point. Most of the clients that we're working with are just starting off. Most of those clients are signing a lease with someone. They don't own their building. And that landlord is going to have language in the lease document that is usually very specific about what kind of insurance it is that they're going to require. If your landlord is amenable to it, you can sometimes push off placing that insurance, but for the most part, they want you at a minimum to place general liability insurance for the premise in case somebody, like say you have a contractor come by, or heaven forbid somebody breaks in and hurts themselves and then decides to sue, then that landlord is going to have protection. The other time when you need it, just when you start buying stuff. So this is not a cheap industry to get started in. Even if you start off with a small nano brewery, you're still laying out a relative large sum of money for all of this equipment. It's very capital intensive. So at that point, that becomes a conversation pretty much with yourself. It's a philosophical issue as to whether or not you need to protect that equipment immediately. My counsel is always to place that insurance as soon as you can. It's not going to save you a whole hell of a lot of money if you decide to postpone placing that insurance until 6 months down the road, whenever you think that you're getting closer to getting open.
It looks like Candace has a question.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Candace.
That's okay. I actually have more of a statement, which is that, so when I am talking to startups, I tell them they need to reach out to insurance agents before signing the lease. I was told previously that to some extent, if you wait till you sign the lease, now you have a deadline with the landlord. And so your options might be more limited because you don't have a lot of time to shop around. So I always tell them that should be one of their first calls when they're even in a talking to a landlord phase.
That's a great point, Candace, because if we're trying to place this entire, if we're trying to underwrite the entire brewery, I want a month. I can squeeze it in quicker than that if I can call in favors if I have to, but obviously I don't like to do that. If it's a situation where we have a lease where we just need to place general liability coverage for that just to satisfy something, I can usually go online and quote up just take the square footage of whatever the building is and insure it as an office space just to have premise liability at the time. And so that's something that can be done pretty much immediately. And when I say immediately, it can be done as quickly as my account manager is able to get around to it, because they don't let me quote stuff online. They just let me bring it in. But to your point, yeah, like you want as much time to underwrite these things properly, the right way. There's another insurance policy that we'll talk about later on in the presentation that you may need. It's called builder's risk. It's a type of property policy that's in place to basically protect all the stuff that's laying around that's going to go into the build out process. You're going to have a tap room, or you're a manufacturing brewery that's not having any on-site tasting, which I don't know that those really exist anymore. If you are having a tap room, then obviously you need liquor liability. Are you just serving your beer? Are you serving other people's beers? I know Colorado changed the laws since the pandemic, or since just before the pandemic, I think, where breweries with their manufacturer's license are actually allowed to pour beer from other breweries as well. If you're a brew pub, then you have the ability to sell liquor. So any of those things, just you got to keep in mind that whenever you do those things, that's going to make that liquor liability policy just a little bit more expensive. The next bullet there under pre-planning is talk to at least 2 brokers. And one of those brokers can't be your State Farm guy. If your personal lines insurance rep happens to work for a large independent agency, then you can talk to that agency, but don't talk to your personal lines guy, because more than 9 times out of 10 they'll tell you that they can take care of it for you, but they're just going to put a really general restaurant policy in place, or they're going to put a very general manufacturing policy in place. Experience matters in these instances. I had one of the experts that I was talking about that NFP has in one of their verticals is a guy that works in for financial institutions. And I have a new financial institution client, and I was really concerned about the cyber liability policy for these guys because they get so expensive. And he's like, oh no, this happens all the time with people that don't understand financial institutions. We don't have to cover their monetary losses. Those are covered through a bond. And so it should be very cheap. And so I, as just an idiot insurance guy, would have never known that and would have placed this policy for something that's completely out of my realm of expertise. And neither myself nor my client would have known better. Same goes for something that's as specific as the craft beverage industry. If you have just a regular manufacturer's policy or regular restaurant policy covering this brewery, and if you make a mistake while I'm sure my buddy Dan has seen this probably more than he'd like to see. I don't know, maybe actually, Dan, have you ever seen anybody implode a tank? Is he still with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, it took me a bit to mute.
Oh no, you're good, man.
I have seen it. I haven't actually seen it occur, but I've seen the aftermath of it for sure.
Yeah. So if you have those tanks, let's say you just have the brewery I have, a 7-barrel brewery. I think back in the old times, whenever I paid for that brewery, I think each one of those tanks was just shy of $10,000. I can't imagine what those tanks would cost these days. But if I made a mistake, wasn't paying attention to the chemicals I was using or the temperatures that I was using to clean those things, and I implode that tank with a properly written brewery policy, I've got coverage for that implosion. Otherwise, I do not. It's marked up as a mistake that I made. It wouldn't be covered. So that's the basics for those. So after you have had these conversations with your brokers, after you've picked somebody, then you need to go. Then it's time to go to market, and your broker is going to handle most of this. But what you're going to need to know are your numbers. General liability or all liability policies are based on your revenue numbers. So you need to have a general idea of what your annual revenue is going to be by category. So if you're selling food, how much food are you going to sell? If you're selling your beer, how much beer is being sold for on-premise consumption versus out the back door in kegs or wholesale growlers, things like that. The broker will put together these applications. You may have to, or you or your client may have to put together some more detailed supplemental applications that go out. Those can range anywhere from 1-page to 8-page applications, depending on who you're working with. And hopefully you're getting quotes from several different carriers. The carriers that I'm using for the most part for my breweries right now are the PAC programs, which I believe was a title sponsor for CDC again this past year. Cincinnati Insurance, who I mentioned earlier, Philadelphia Insurance, and the Hartford. Those are the 4 main players for. That kind of covers the gamut of everything for every brewery, from a startup to a very first year startup all the way to your really big regional sized breweries. Those carriers have the expertise, the experience, and the underwriting knowledge to take care of those. One thing to be aware of for our startup brewery clients, if you're going into even a small size insurance brokerage, because of the relative size of this account, there's a really good chance that it's going to be placed with a small business unit that's going to have a handful of people that are in charge of handling a whole bunch of different accounts. And so it's going to be really important for you, the brewery owner or the policy holder, to maintain contact with that broker. They're usually juggling so many different policies that they don't have time to be proactive and reach out. So if there's ever any concerns about what comes up, make sure that you're taking the initiative to reach out. One thing that I skipped over that I want to talk about, whenever you're reviewing these quotes from your carrier, make sure that you're looking, that when you get a copy of that policy, go to the very back of that policy, and there's going to be probably 20 to 50 pages of endorsements. And those endorsements do one of two things. They either grant coverage back that was taken away somewhere in the policy, or they take coverage away that was granted in the policy. And you want to make sure that those endorsements and those exclusions are not doing something like taking away liquor liability. I've seen that happen before. It's not because you didn't ask for it. It's because there are humans that are touching these things, and sometimes things slip through the cracks. So looking at those, just as important as looking at the cost of the premium, the limits of liability that you're carrying, you want to make sure that you know what those endorsements are saying. And what's next? So all of these policies, they're all scalable, right? The larger your company grows, the more revenues you have, the more property values you have. So that policy just kind of organically grows with your operations. But as you grow, or if you start off a little bit larger, getting close to a regional size brewery, are you bringing on a board of directors? A lot of the more successful breweries that I've worked with have a board of directors. If you don't have a board of directors, it'd be a really good idea to get one. If you do have a board of directors, you're going to need an insurance policy called Directors and Officers Liability. And that protects you from any decisions that you make or any mistakes that are made that may cause financial harm to people that have financial interest in the operation. The most common way that I've seen this policy pay out, and I haven't seen it not for any type of a brewery operation, but if someone goes declares bankruptcy and there's a bunch of vendors out there that are sitting there holding notes, like, hey, you owe us money, then that policy pays those vendors that are holding those tickets, as opposed in the absence of this policy, the directors and officers that are making these decisions, their personal assets would be on the line. So that's very important policy. Anytime that I've joined a board of directors, whether it's in the brewing industry or for a nonprofit, the first thing that I've asked to see is a copy of their directors and officers policy. What are you laughing at, Candace?
Having been on a board of directors that was like, a what?
Happens all the time. Online sales. A lot of these vendors that we work with, and I know we have somebody here from Arrive here that can probably shine a light on how they operate as it relates to the cyber liability issues that come with that. But if you are selling things online, if credit card numbers are being transferred across lines, then you more than likely you have a cyber liability exposure. Cyber liability is a type of coverage that is fairly new. And I say fairly new, like just in the last decade or so, since it is when we've really started pushing this, and it is getting very expensive because people are constantly under attack. Luckily, breweries aren't really an entity where the hackers have their sights set on them. The financial institution client that I mentioned earlier, that's their cyber liability policy is probably their most expensive line of coverage that they carry. Then I have the expansion and construction projects that you may undertake. Again, I mentioned the builder's risk policy earlier. That policy covers, if you have a bunch of lumber that's laying out, there's a freezing rainstorm and all that wood gets damaged, then that's not necessarily part of the building. It's just sitting out there as property. So that builder's risk policy covers that. And if it's written in a certain way, that builder's risk can also cover soft costs, such as if there's a delay in opening, you have to change a bunch of advertising, things like that. Those builder's risk policies will respond to that as well. And then finally, do you have employees? You should have employees because you can't do everything by yourself. But sometimes employees do stupid things, just like owners do stupid things. I wrote an article for Starter Brewery a couple months back about employee practices liability. It happened back, kind of on the cusp of that of the rat. What was it? Mouse rat?
Rat magnet.
Rat Magnet. No, Mouse Rat is the band from Parks and Rec, I think. Rat Magnet. And the employee practices liability policy is in place to respond to instances like that. If there's alleged sexual misconduct, if there's alleged discrimination in hiring and firing practices. But the main point that I tried to make in that article was that it's not carte blanche for bad behavior, bad actors. You want to understand what these risks are. You want to train your employees to do the right thing, to be good people, and that employee practice liability policy is there. If something goes wrong or somebody accuses you of something outside of your brewery that you have had no control over, even just alleged misconduct, that employee practices policy would respond. And then the last one that as it relates to employees would be crime policy. Yeah, sorry.
No, actually, Matt, go ahead and finish, because I was just going to comment as an attorney who, sees lawsuits come in for employees. I was going to comment a little bit and then ask a question, but why don't you finish your last point first?
Oh, no, I was just going to say a crime policy is the last one. As you have crime coverage to a small degree that's built into your property policy, but those are usually limited to sublimits of like $25,000 or so. I had a brewery client that is a much larger brewery, and their controller had been slowly siphoning money over several years out the back door, and it was a claim close. It was around $500,000, and luckily we had we had an insurance policy, a crime policy in place that had $1 million limits, so we were able to cover that expense and make sure that people paid for their actions. Candace, please go ahead.
Oh, you didn't have that on the slide. I thought you were done after the employee thing.
I am done.
I got it. But yes, I will mention, even before Rat Magnet, the EPLI employment policy, or the EPLI EPLI policy that covers employment is hugely, I think, beneficial. And I've seen a lot of my clients benefit from that, especially in a state like California, where it's actually just very easy to screw up an employment law, or, have people claiming things that, you may or may not have happened. Nobody, he said, she said, but at least you've got, the insurance company will generally pay for the attorney, for an attorney to defend you, potentially, as well as I've had people who, we were able to settle things with the employee under their deductible, but, it's kind of nice to have that safety net. Then the question I was going to ask is because, and I've wondered about this, and would be very brewery specific, is if you have done any key man insurance policies, and if you can talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done several key man policies. The Cincinnati policy that I mentioned before actually has I think it's part of the property policy itself that has a key man-esque provision in it that I think would serve a purpose for even up to maybe a regional size brewery, that if that key person is disabled for whatever reason, there are several covered causes of loss for that person, then it'll pay up to, I want to say that there was like around $500,000 to do things like fly wherever you need to go fly, or fly someone in to talk to interview people to replace this person. If you need to redo research and documents, there can be monies there to help offset the costs there. But outside of that, outside of something like that, the key man policy is, it's a life insurance policy. So if it's something that you want to place, the brewery that I just mentioned that had the crime loss, we're trying to get a key man policy place for their, not really their head brewer, but the director of brewing operations there. And since it's a life policy, this fella's He's older than me, put it that way. And I'm not young, but it's you're subject to life insurance underwriting questions. So, are you a smoker? Are you healthy? How old are you? What's your family history? Things like that. And those, and depending on how much of a benefit you want, typically $1 million is enough. But that key man policy can be used. The brewery is named as a beneficiary to that, so the brewery gets the benefit of that money. The other thing that money can be used for as well is if that person is an owner in the business and they pass away. If that person's significant other all of a sudden becomes the de facto other owner in the business, that person may not be set up to run a brewery. And so that money can be used to then buy out that person's half of the brewery or whatever portion of the brewery that they have, and then move on from there. But yeah, it's a life insurance policy. They're simple to place. I usually hand those off, especially if it's someone. I have so many friends in the industry, and the questions do get very personal. So I'll typically hand that off to one of my colleagues to deal with the underwriting questions and just doing the due diligence on those. But yeah, did I answer your question, Candace? I know.
Sort of. So, well, I guess I wonder. So, my question regarding that, when I'm looking at a client, and here's where I've thought about it, is where one person, whether they're an owner or an employee, but is really the face of the brewery. And so if something happened to them and they were gone, that especially if the brewery had done, let's say, a huge capital raise and owed a ton of money, and now the person that was the face of that company, the company may or may not carry on or be able to carry on as it did before. And so I guess that's where I've always kind of thought about it. And now granted,
So that's why whenever you buy these things, you buy them in increments of at least $500,000, because if that person is very valuable like that, it could cost quite a bit of money to go track down somebody who is that person's equal.
So Matt, question, you had said to me at one point that insurance agents are available to review contracts through the process of things when you're a startup. What help me with that?
Yeah. So I look at most of the contracts that I review personally are lease contracts. And that's for me anyway, for me personally, that's really the only one that I feel qualified to review. So I'll dig through there, and I can tell pretty quickly whether or not the person that's the landlord that's put this in front of them is using just cut and paste a stock contract, or if they're asking for things that are out of the ordinary. Anything beyond that, if a brokerage is worth its salt, they have in-house counsel on staff. And that's who I lean on for anything that may be outside of just specific insurance language, or someone like Ms. Campsman.
So what kinds of contracts would your customers bring you?
Oh gosh, distribution contracts. But because of my my background in the beer world, I get asked all kinds of questions. I actually gosh, Candace will love this one. I about a year into my brewery operating, one of my other clients who was about the same age realized that they did not have their wholesale license, and they had been wholesaling for a long time. And so they came to me, and in Colorado, through my wholesale license, I was able to perform a limited distribution agreement and sell their beer for them through my brewery as a distributorship. But that was the first distributor contract I ever saw, and I gave that to an attorney. So yeah, but no, it's for me personally, it's been distribution contracts, lease contracts. I think those are the only two that I've seen from the brewery world.
Gotcha.
Co-packing contracts.
Gotcha. Contract brewing, is that what you're talking about there?
No, there's co-packers. The contract brewer, I've never been shown or asked to decipher a contract brewing contract or an alternating proprietorship contract outside of the insurance specifics of those. I have several clients that are in contract brewing arrangements. But again, anytime I see something like that, anytime I'm asked about it, I'm happy to look it over. But I refer them to their attorney. And if they don't have one, then I tell them to get one.
Gotcha. All right. If you have questions about insurance, comments about insurance, any of our contributors, I know insurance can impact lots of areas. Dana, you talked about tanks a little. Doug, anybody have any comments about insurance? Or we're also open to take any general questions if anybody wants to enter any questions in the chat or raise your hand. You can raise your hand by clicking reactions down at the bottom of the screen. Any insurance comments, thoughts?
Hi, sorry.
Yeah.
Can I get a question related to Gypsy Brewery? So imagine how do you have any policies for companies which are kind of like renting themselves into to use the facilities of other breweries? Because we don't really own our own product at the moment. We kind of stand at crossroad at the moment. So I was just wondering your take on that. How?
Yeah, that would be an interest. So I've never personally written a Gypsy Brewery. I've met a few of them. There were a few Gypsy brewers that worked out of the old Breckenridge facility for a while. I was wondering, are you doing this in the United States or would it be overseas?
It's overseas.
So I'm going to explain to you like the challenges that we would have here in the United States. My guess is they would be fairly similar there, but just take it with that caveat. But whenever you have a general liability policy, because that's mainly what you're going to be concerned with, because you don't own anything like your own proper equipment. But those liability policies they have a specific location tied to them. They're usually good for like if my brewery is tied to this location, but if I'm going to go pour beer like at a beer festival somewhere, or if I'm going to go down the street to go collaborate with one of my fellow brewers, it's understood that there's a little bit of expansion there. There's room for to take care of those little ancillary exposures. But if the actual model of your business is to be brewing somewhere differently every single time, in my mind, what would have to happen is that you would have to provide the underwriter with a list going forward of like, hey, I'm going to be brewing at this place, this place, this place. Here are the addresses. Here are the legal names of those entities in order to make sure that coverage followed you wherever you went. There may be a way to make that broader where you could, it's called manuscripting coverage, where the coverage doesn't really exist, and so the underwriter has to come up with a way to cover it. And they could say that it's understood that this person will be brewing beer at various locations in this country or in this state, and they may be able to broaden the language where that would happen. That's the first thing I would shoot for. But if they can't do that, you may have to go through and schedule every specific location that you go to. It's going to be, it's for whatever reason, underwriters don't like alternating proprietorships. They don't mind contract brewers, but they don't like alternating proprietorships. And my guess is that the Gypsy brewers will be like one peg below that whenever it comes time to figure out how they're going to wrap their brains around it.
So Gypsy Brewing, just to clarify, would be actually doing the brewing yourself on the other company's equipment. Is that correct, Asborn?
That's correct, yes.
So it's basically just one alternating proprietorship after another.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, it's not so. Oh, but thank you.
Absolutely.
How would that work in terms of the ownership of the product? I guess you would follow the same strategy in terms of the manufacturing license that way?
Okay, it's a whole crazy mess when it comes to licensing, and it's different in every state, and there is no there's no such license as a gypsy license. You have to kind of, again, it depends on the state. And my state, California, for example, you couldn't own the product because there's no license you can get other than calling it an alt prop. I mean, it's not a easy way to do things. So at least not in California, and I don't think in most other US states. But we found ways to finagle.
Westbourne, any follow-ups there? Or are you good?
No, I'm good. It's just a temporary solution for sure. It's not a permanent solution. That's for sure. But yeah, no, it completely makes sense. So I think my path is clear.
Gotcha. We
Thanks.
have a question. Is there insurance to cover volunteers for canning and bottling days and beer festivals who are not employed by the brewery?
Yeah, there's what's, so I guess I'd say, first of all, I'd say I would suggest not doing that, or doing that as little as possible. But two, there are two different ways that you can address that exposure. There is what's called a volunteer accident policy. Basically acts like a workers' compensation policy for volunteers. Those are, you can get those written on an annual basis if you have a lot of volunteers that come through, like someone like a Habitat for Humanity, for instance. And depending on your workers' compensation carrier, like I believe that Liberty Mutual can do this. They can endorse their workers' comp policy to cover volunteers who are doing work that's basically in the scope of your regular operations. But again, don't limit your volunteers to beer festivals. Make sure that those volunteers are vetted and trained. You don't want volunteers. I know one of the things that always kind of bugged me was, I can't remember what they call it, but it's like basically I have like a guest bartender from somewhere else come in. Don't do that. Just like if your beer tenders need to be your employees, they need to be trained by you and set that way. But to answer your question, yeah, either through a volunteer accident policy or through a properly endorsed workers' compensation policy.
Matt, if you have a festival on site at the brewery at your tasting room, do you need separate insurance coverage for that? Is that covered in your general liability?
It's depending on how big it is. Honestly, like that's where you need to reach out to the broker and say, hey, is this covered? We do have coverage in for each one of those carriers that I listed off. They'll cover like an anniversary party, something roughly that size. If you have a beer festival that's roughly the size of a typical anniversary party, it's going to be covered. What you don't want to happen is I got a call from one of my brewery clients one time asking if there was coverage in case someone got injured during a wrestling exhibition, and we got it covered. But going forward, we started placing event specific policies for wrestling events. Everyone's fine. That's the only reason I can laugh about it now.
Yeah, well, you covered our not fine point at our festival, so I think the festival coverage is important. I think that the fine line between what size does it get before it needs its own coverage is an interesting zone.
Yeah, and that's a conversation I go back and have with the underwriter. And like we say, like we'll get like, roughly how many people do you think are going to attend this thing? Is there are you going to have like a dunk booth or something outside of the normal scope of operations? And having that conversation with the underwriters decides whether or not we need to place an event specific policy for whatever event they're throwing. But I will say too, I tell folks, I'm a pretty risk tolerant guy. I tell people, I was like, don't let what an insurance person tells you keep you from doing something. I mean, as long as you know what you're doing and you're controlling for it, insurance policies shouldn't dictate how you operate. They should dictate, maybe to a slight degree, but don't let it. If you want to have a dunk tank or if you want to have a wrestling event, then have a risking event. Just make sure that you're covering your bases either with proper risk management techniques that are extra insurance, or that you're actually placing an insurance policy for that.
Are you dealing at all with COVID insure policy stuff?
Other than disappointing a lot of people, not really. That was we haven't had to deal with it in it's been about a year or so, I guess, since the most common claim obviously was people wanted to know if they had coverage under their business interruption policies, which they didn't. That's also a property policy, and in order for a property policy to be triggered, you have to have property damage. We've tried to prove that an infected surface was damaged property, and so far that's kind of falling on deaf ears, both from a claims adjustment standpoint and from a legislative standpoint as well. But what we did do for every single one of my clients was file business interruption claims because of COVID, so that if there happens to be legislation down the road that kind of on the back end opens up a possibility to have those claims adjudicated, closed in our favor, then our thought is that the people that are holding a declination letter in their hands will be the first ones in line. But no, that's outside of that, nothing else COVID related. Well, workers' comp, I should take that back. The workers' compensation was, we were getting tests paid for. COVID was a covered cause of loss. After it took a couple months for Pinnacle to come around on that, but we covered lost time because of COVID as a compensable workers' compensation claim.
So when people are doing startups and they're covering their build out in their company with coverage with you, do you handle all the HR stuff too?
I don't handle any HR stuff personally, but our benefits, employee benefits department have a ton of resources there as it relates to human resources compliance, things like that. Typically, you'll have, in order to access that stuff, you usually have to be an employee benefits client. And we know a lot of breweries aren't, but just because it's just so damn expensive. But if there's something that someone is looking for, like a template for employee handbooks, things like that, then I have those. No, I see somebody ducking their head over there. That is something that I've provided my clients in the past, and they kind of and just help them with guidance and getting those put together. Cue the
So unemployment, workers' comp, all that stuff.
Go ahead, Candace.
Just trying to find the raise hand button. I'm going to put a caveat out there for anyone who uses a template for their employee handbook. That actually, maybe John, are you actually listening to this? I see you on there.
John Hyman, yeah.
What are your thoughts on using a template for an employee handbook?
Terrible. Don't do it. For a couple of reasons. Number one, because you don't know for what state that template was prepared. State laws really vary a lot, and what's a good handbook in California is going to be overkill in a lot of other states that don't have a lot of the same over-inclusive employment laws that California does, for example. And secondly, you don't know when that template was prepared. The laws change from year to year, and so a Google search, I always just like Google MD, Google JD presents the same problems, because you don't the template you're using just hasn't been vetted. So in terms of whether it's accurate or complies with changes in the law. So while it's a good starting point, it really is just that, and it should absolutely be run past employment counsel before it's rolled out to employees for compliance purposes. And what I tell clients all the time is that while you think you're saving yourself some money by giving me that template that you found through a Google search as a starting point, it's probably going to cost you more for me to fix their mistakes and for me just to do it for you from scratch.
Cool. Okay. Understood. What about?
And actually, wait, I got one more thing to say
Wait,
about
sure.
handbooks. Because this is just, I don't know if it's like a pet topic of mine, but you got to be very, very, actually, I know why, because I have breweries, not mine, thank God, but that will put a handbook in place because they need to have a handbook. And then it just stays there. They don't enforce it equally, which means they enforce it when they want to. They want to get rid of somebody, they use it. They don't apply it equally, which is pretty much basis for a lawsuit right there. And or they never update it after that, which means that 3-4 years go by. We should probably update this. And, you know, in a state like California, our employment laws change every 6 months. So it's one of those things that you've got to be very, very careful. If you're not going to enforce it, don't put it in place.
Okay, John Hyman.
Yeah, all of the above. Yeah, all of the above. Yeah, everything Candace just said.
Okay, Matt, did you want to follow that with something else?
I got one more on the employee
Okay.
handbook. One of my biggest clients gave me a copy of their existing employee handbook. And I don't know where they got it from, but it was apparently written for an actual like office. And it literally said they were not allowed to have alcohol in the premises. Which makes me wonder if anyone ever read the employee handbook to start with.
Yeah, the handbook should definitely match the tone of the business, which for breweries, it's going to be a much less formal document than what I would prepare, right, for an accountant's office, or written on a different, written differently than I would for a manufacturing client or whatever. Yeah, absolutely.
No, I've got nothing to add other than I'm just going to stop doing that, I guess.
You've now been scolded. Okay.
I haven't.
Sorry, I didn't mean to shit on your parade. I'm sorry.
Oh, it was Candace.
No,
Candace gets
it's funny.
full
As soon as
credit.
I started talking about that, I realized I was like, oh shit, Candace and I have totally gone round and round about this before.
Actually, Matt, just give a disclaimer. Like, I have this, but there's some potential downside. So basically, it's like I tell my clients, you're making a business decision. I'm just telling you what the possibilities that can happen.
Well, what I need to do is just I can continue to, because it's a really great template. But but say, yeah, here's this, but don't use it as is. Consult your attorney with this. But yeah, to John, your point, I appreciate that the point about it's going to cost them more for you to fix that thing than otherwise. So I'll definitely add that to my spiel whenever I'm talking about the handbooks in the future.
Always. I mean, I have a questionnaire I send out to clients, and I always will quote usually I will quote a client a flat fee for a handbook, and I have a form questionnaire I'll send out to a client that really they're doing a lot of the lifting. What policies do you want? Check this box, check this box, and then I build the handbook from there. It's really a fairly frictionless process for them, and it's generally, particularly for a small business, not that great of an investment, and it'll save them a lot of headaches down the road by doing it that way.
And maybe they'd have an attorney to tell them when the law changed and they need to update it.
That doesn't hurt either.
Okay. All right. Well, we hit our hour. Everybody, just reminder to tune in June 15th for Dustin Howe to talk about locations and some brewery design. Thank you all for being here. This will be posted on our YouTube channel, so feel free to come back. I did have a request to share the slides that you prepared, Matt, so I can post those also on YouTube.
Sure, yeah, if somebody wants those, but there's not a ton of information on there, so anytime, if you're looking at that and have any questions about the detail that I provided below that, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Appreciate y'all too. Take care, everybody.